On April 18th, 1906, at 5:12 a.m., a colossal earthquake hit the city of San Francisco. Before the earthquake, San Francisco was the place to be in the West. The Great California Gold Rush had brought people to the American West, and many families had settled in San Francisco. The population at the time of the earthquake was about 400,000. Hours before the disaster, Enrico Caruso, a popular opera tenor at the time, had performed in the city. The next day, when he was interviewed about his experience with the earthquake, he said, "I wake up about 5 o'clock, feeling my bed rocking as though I am in a ship on the ocean. I get up and go to the window, raise the shade, and look out. And what I see makes me tremble with fear. I see the building toppling over, big pieces of masonry falling, and from the street below I hear the cries and screams of men and women and children." In a letter to his mother, Silas W. Mack wrote that Wednesday, April 18th, will go down in history as the date of the most terrible calamity the United States, and particularly California, has ever known. I do not feel much like writing about it. Would feel better if I could cry, but I cannot. We were awakened at 5:15 a.m. by the shock of the earthquake. There have been several since I've been in California, but only 2 before this were sufficiently pronounced so that I remember them. They did no damage. This one was much more violent, even here, and was accompanied by a dreadful rumbling noise and roaring. Not particularly loud, but coming as it were from mighty forces at war in the distance. The house swayed back and forth. It seemed quite a while, but I think not more than 5 seconds. Then, with a sudden wrench, stopped. The earthquake lasted for about 60 seconds. The quake was estimated to have a magnitude of 7.9 on the Richter scale. The quake was felt as far away as Los Angeles, Oregon, and Nevada. San Francisco was built on the San Andreas Fault, which is the boundary between the Pacific Plate and the North American Plate. Even though the earthquake trembled for only a minute, the damage was catastrophic. Over 500 city blocks were demolished. 28,000 buildings were destroyed, leaving about 225,000 people homeless. The damages cost more than $300 million in 1906. At 8:18 a.m., a major aftershock collapsed many of the buildings that were damaged in the first quake. About the earthquake, Ernest H. Adams noted, in a letter to his colleagues, "For me to describe the scenes and events of the past few days would be an impossibility at present, and no doubt you would have had more news regarding the awful fate of the city than I myself know. All that I can say at this writing is, that at about 5:15 a.m., Wednesday morning, I was thrown out of bed, and in a twinkling of an eye the side of our house was dashed to the ground. How we got into the street I'll never be able to tell, as I fell and crawled down the stairs amid flying glass and timber and plaster. When the dust cleared away, I saw nothing but a ruin of a house and home that had taken 20 years to build. I saw the fires in the city arising in great clouds."
Well, there was an earthquake in 1906, and it really raised the dickens where we were living, south of Market, and everything south of Market was destroyed with the earthquake, and the fire did more damage than the earthquake.
The quake had broken the gas lines and ignited several fires across San Francisco. The fires had reduced a lot of the buildings to ash. These blazes had burned for 3 days and destroyed most of the city. E.C. Howard wrote, "People were warned as much as possible against using their gas, but many disregarded the warning. And many small explosions in various parts of the city kindled numerous fires that need not have occurred. Perhaps the big San Francisco disaster might have been averted in the main if persons had used more caution after the earthquake had broken gas mains and electric light wires." Eyewitness Arthur C. Poor wrote that the upward draft of such a fire was terrific, the air rushing in from all sides to a common center and being sucked upward. It was estimated that the smoke rose to a height of 1,000 feet. The city officials decided to use dynamite to clear a path from the rubble. Their idea was to destroy some of the city to save the rest. The officials planned to create fire breaks using the dynamite. However, the inexperienced staff just fueled the fire more. After the earthquake, about 75,000 people fled San Francisco. The people that had stayed and were left homeless by the disaster lived in tent camps. 40,000 refugees stayed in camps in Golden Gate Park and the Presidio. In the winter, they replaced the tents with small green huts. There are still 2 standing in the Presidio today. San Francisco was rebuilt very quickly, almost too quickly to some people. Within days, citizens were drafted to help remove debris from the streets, and 300 plumbers were ready to work. In a year, over 800 houses and saloons were built. In just 3 years, over 20,000 buildings had been built in San Francisco. By 1915, San Francisco had recovered from a tragedy that had devastated about 400,000 people.
After this disaster, many seismologists began to study earthquakes and the San Andreas Fault. They studied how to build structures and houses to withstand earthquakes. San Francisco did make some fire preventative measures to make sure there wouldn't be another fire this big. The original building code in San Francisco wasn't really changed much, but in 1909, a new law was passed that new buildings had to be inspected. After this disaster, Harry Fielding Reid studied the ground around the San Andreas Fault. He concluded that the elastic rebound of the rocks on either side of the fault caused the earthquake. The elastic rebound theory of earthquakes was the only theory that successfully explained why earthquakes happen. After 1906, seismographs were made much more prevalent. Seismographs help seismologists study the duration and force of different earthquakes. The quake also spread public knowledge of earthquakes and what to do in one. Schools all over California participate in the Great California Shakeout and have earthquake drills. There are tributes to the earthquake and fire, like the Golden Fire Hydrant. The Golden Fire Hydrant was one of the only working hydrants in the city. It saved the Mission District and is now repainted gold every year as a thank you to the fire department for their bravery. There is a plaque next to the hydrant that reads, "Though the water mains were broken and dry on April 18, 1906, yet from this Greenberg hydrant on the following night there came a stream of water, allowing the firemen to save the Mission District. Dedicated to Chief Dennis Sullivan and the men who fought the Great Fire, and to the spirit of the people of San Francisco, who, regardless of their losses, brought our city from its ruins to be host to the world, with their 1915 Panama Pacific Exposition and the building of our Civic Center. May their love and devotion for the city be an inspiration for all to follow, and their motto, the city that knows how, a light to lead all future generations." Presented to San Francisco by the Upper Noe Valley Neighborhood Council, April 18, 1966. Every April 18th at 5:12 a.m., multiple sirens wail as the exact moment the earthquake began. Today, San Francisco is a booming city with almost 900,000 people. The city has several iconic landmarks, including Coit Tower, Alcatraz Island, Lombard Street, and the Golden Gate Bridge. Although San Francisco has grown and changed, the citizens haven't forgotten the disaster that has shaped the city, and they never will.